I was going to pick up a few pieces from the last time we were taping, believe it or not. I'm still talking about the proposal that I suggested that the primary purpose of words might be, from a more complex view, simply as preparation for something else upcoming, such as more words, such as anything, rather than from the local view, from a small view like that, of the words everywhere from apparently to obviously intended to convey something specific. And I was using very common examples last time we were taking, if you recall, of weather forecasting, economic forecasting, pointing out, without repeating the whole thing, pointing out that both of these areas, any well-read, reasonable person whose memory can survive over several hours realizes that there is no such thing as any dependable, factual ability for any human to forecast, for instance, the weather or the economic futures of any markets, any general economy, etc. And in that line there was one that I didn't get around to mentioning, that a media weather person made a comment in a somewhat facetious manner after he'd given the forecast. And I think one of, as you know how they do now in the non-print media, the little happy news team there on the TV, somebody else said something like, well, since it's the weekend coming up, I hope you're correct. And the weather person says, well, regarding his forecast, he said, it may not be right, but it's pertinent. And see, life does not give just me and Kyrud all the good lines. Because he looked as shocked as everybody else, like, well, boy, that's almost something that was worth hearing. You know, nobody wanted to fool with it. They didn't want to go any further. All right. What I was going to suggest to you that, again, you have one of these examples of people actually knowing more than they know, having the ability to grasp onto more information than is necessary, because I would suggest to you that life was actually, in that little scenario, in those words, was actually declaring that although this information, that is what seemed to be the actual intent of the words, his forecast, going into details, numbers, exotic turns of phrases only to do with the art of meteorology, but that life was actually declaring in a way that although the facts, the information, the forecast that you've just heard is probably incorrect and useless, it is still pertinent in the overall movement of energy. That's why you laughed. That's why they laughed. That's why the guy laughed when his tongue and lips said it. That, well, it may not be right, which, assuming he's got any memory, and he's been in the business for years, he knows that he's being magnanimous to say, well, it may not be right, but it's pertinent. Think about it. Whatever drove his mouth to say that, which of course was life, that it is pertinent. And you can start off on a low level right quick, I wasn't going to stay on this, and say that although, based upon the historical proof, if you were just ordinarily reasonable, intelligent, that the forecast is probably faulty, probably undependable. And yet, life is making that person in the midst of that secondary activity state that although, you know, it may not be right, it's pertinent. It is pertinent, or life would not be doing it. And you laughed. They laughed. But think about it. From an ordinary view instead of a more complex view, instead of a view like this, if you were looking, if you're down looking here as you're supposed to, how can you rectify? How can you put together something being incorrect and being pertinent? There is no way that that kind of plane will fly in the neural system of ordinary people. They are mutually exclusive. Something cannot be incorrect and be pertinent. But you laughed, he laughed, the people that heard it laughed. Of course, that particular kind of laugh, it's like somebody got hold of your internal, not the somatic side, but viscerally got into your nervous system and went, dee-dee-dee. That's when it goes. Because if we were operating at the ordinary level, and I stopped a minute and said, what's funny about that? And let's say you're ordinary, just ordinary, intelligent, sophisticated, you'd go, well, I guess the only thing funny is it's kind of a non sequitur, because if something's not correct, it can't be pertinent. How's the weather pertinent if indeed he was more than just joking? If he was making an abject admission that, hey, I can't predict the weather, but at least it's pertinent. That is, my faulty predictions, my non-predictions. This information that is incorrect, at least is pertinent. Well, then if you're ordinary, you might say, well, the laugh is, and it's apparent. It's just jump in your face, non-sequitarianity. Which would be a little small view. And you'd have to leave it at that. And then I guess somebody might be ordinarily sophisticated and hip enough to say, well, that's sort of the basis of much humor. Just the verbal unexpectedness of non sequiturs, playing with language, to say, well, it may not be right, but it's pertinent. That there was the chief laugh, because that's ridiculous. It's not ridiculous. Because things can be pertinent on a much larger level and be absolutely insane, be wrong, be incorrect, be faulty. But just let's leave it at be wrong. Bad information, non-information, and be pertinent. But at the ordinary level at which the intellect works, it cannot be both. It's not open to discussion. You don't have to be a philosopher. You don't even have to be a damn bricklayer. It's just not open to discussion. If a piece of information is incorrect, it is not pertinent. Case closed. And yet it is. Could any of you, or would you care to, try and apply that to the individual operations of your own intellect and all the facts, all the information it has? From facts that may be self-evident, obvious, incontrovertible, to those that may start drifting into the area of strong opinion, very likely. It doesn't matter to the degree. But all of what seems to be your information, if you take it as something you know, that the distance between here and Chattanooga is 100 miles, that you know that for a fact. You've driven it, you've seen it on a map. If you take that as a fact, and then you take, if someone else said, well, I'll tell you a fact. It is actually 200 miles to Chattanooga. Not only is that incorrect, as far as you know, as far as you're convinced, it has no pertinence. There's nothing to do with that. And so all the information that your brain has is correct. Now, it may remember something. If I said, do you have filed away any incorrect information? Then if you're ordinary, you're left again with, you're asking silly questions to say the least, because hell no. Why would I have any information filed away? Why would there be anything I believe I know that's incorrect? Contrary, as soon as I find out perhaps that something I know thought I knew was incorrect, outdated, I dispense with it and I file away the good information. Now I remember other people that's had wrong information. In fact, it was just recently, it was no more than 60 seconds ago, a guy told me that it was 200 miles from Atlanta to Chattanooga when I know it's not. And so that's not a piece of information I have, but it's a piece of information I have a recollection that somebody else had a faulty piece of information, because everything I've got is correct, or I don't have it. Back to, in case you lost your place, me going to the trouble to quote a weather forecaster that, well, my prediction may not be, that is my information, the information I've passed along so kindly to you people after studying for years and years and wearing a suit and getting a haircut and being here on television. This information that I have just given you, they flash my name on the screen, they say, here it is, channel 49 right here in Charlotte, and here it is, Bunky Oldham's weather. And they give the man 5 minutes to do funny things, to talk. And he says at the end of it, he says, you know, what I just did, this 5 minutes worth of material I just did for you, and all the graphics, and the helicopters, and me referring to the weather satellites, what I just told you may not be right, but at least it's pertinent. Do any of you see any possible connection between that in the way your brain normally operates. Your brain would not, under ordinary conditions, ever say that. Or if it did, some accidental way, the same way this guy did, that his lips and tongue just completely got out of control. If your brain did that, you'd do the same way that the little anchor people did. You'd go, Well, when we return, we'll be talking about the fire over on Main Street. Because you would have nothing to do with it. That would seem to cause perhaps some laugh, but that would be the end of it. But do you see any possible pertinence, connection between that kind of statement being made, which I'm telling you is actually on a broader range, is a kind of declaration life is making, to what appears to be information, what appears to be the matter of either reliable or unreliable information at the three-dimensional level, can be, as a matter of fact, apparently, or obviously incorrect and still be pertinent. That pertinence has nothing to do on a wider level with so-called human veracity or lack of same. To say that information is only worthwhile if it is true, if it is dependable, if it is correct, if it is verifiable, if it is usable, which is a fact here on earth, three-dimensionally. But to believe that that's the end of it is to stay where you are forever. No, I won't tell you that. I'll give you the blues on Monday. All right. Another little piece. You recall another funny physics law that I pointed out, or maybe this is a social science funny physics law, that talk is what humans do while awaiting their next assignment or between assignments. And as I was running along, verbally sketching and mapping the last time we were taping, I was using even examples wherein it seemed to be tragedy strike somebody. You recall I was about the man whose little accordion repair business burned down, and suddenly he was between assignments that appeared to be a matter of vocational matters. And then I even used a kind of example that a man just found out that his family had been killed in an accident, and he was suddenly no longer a husband and father. I thought maybe some of you might do this on your own, but I can't resist. At the ordinary level, there is a crude knowledge of this. That is, that talk is what humans do between assignments. And the crude knowledge of this comes about in what would appear to be areas, medically speaking. To wit, general people, especially those trained as paramedics and blah, 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 but many ordinary people, you'll know it as soon as I say it. You just picked it up from your own reading and television and movies. But if somebody has just been through some sort of tragedy themselves, they're the victim, say, of a wreck, and they're still alive. Or, if the police come to tell you, I got bad news for you, your family has just been killed in an accident. At any rate, somebody that's been a victim in some way of a tragedy, there's a crude knowledge to know that if the person isn't talking, it is almost an immediate, sure sign of what is known medically as shock. That it's one thing for somebody to be ordinary, I'm just going to use ordinary terminology now. In fact, medicine even uses some of it, but if they're talking hysterically, like, oh, no, that can't be. You must be wrong. It's not my family. As long as they're talking, and you don't really have to be trained, there is just a crude awareness of this. But if someone who has been in some way the victim, whether they were physically hurt themselves in an accident and the paramedics get there, and the man's laying there, and even if there's no apparent visual injury, you're not bleeding, there's no bone sticking out through your skin, but maybe the guy's just laying there. He's been knocked out of the car, let's say, and he's laying there, and he's still conscious, evidently. And they talk to him, or they try to, and they say, can you hear me? And they go, yeah. But he just won't talk. They know, there's a crude knowledge that this is a serious injury, not just visually, not just materially, that is physically. But when somebody's not talking between assignments, it is known crudely that that is a serious sign, because talk is what you're supposed to be doing between assignments, and especially when there are tragic shifts in assignments, such as your own undergoing of some trauma, some accident, physically, or if it appears to be other than physically, such as just horrendously bad news delivered to you or to somebody, and they sort of stagger off or sit down, and the deliverer of the news says, "Are you all right? Are you sure you're all right?" Now, if somebody's crying, which is a form of talk, if they'll cry, or if they'll say something like, "Oh my God, no," and they're playing a good, like, they seem to do good at funerals and wakes in the Middle East, and somebody just screams and begins to pull out their hair and beat on their chest and holler, "No, no, it can't be," then there is not the same crude fear for their health immediately. But if somebody does not talk, and of course I'm the one that made up this kind of verbal map, no one's ever discussed it this way, but they realize that they've gone through some kind of transition. They're between assignments. That this person came and knocked on the door, let's say a policeman, and when they knocked on the door, the man who answers was John Smith, father of little Jimmy and Jane Smith, and husband to Mary Smith. That was his assignment vis-a-vis what information is about to be conveyed. And the policeman says, "I've got to tell you, is your wife so-and-so, your children?" "Yeah. They've just been killed in an accident." He has immediately been taken from one assignment, and he's fixing to go to another one. He's fixing to be a widower. All kinds of ways to describe it. But it is a transition, but it literally is tied to talk. The way in which a person survives it. Not that they've got any choice, but this is the way life deals with it. Talk is what humans do between assignments while waiting on their next assignment. And when somebody's not talking, it's just very crudely known that this could be very likely a sign of serious injury to this person, whether it be physical or, as they would like to call it, psychological. If they're not talking, that's dangerous. Very, very threatening. Well, I was trying to get to the opening paragraph tonight. One more before we start. I thought I was going to say, "What the hell you call this?" but I'm not going to say that. Before we start, what I was just saying, the talk that the individual, when I say the talk is what humans do between assignments or while waiting on their next assignment, would anybody care to look at this kind of stuff as being a kind of extraordinary talk going on between generational assignments? Like you could call it if it was a title in quotation marks, the "What to Do While Awaiting Evil Santa." Or what to do while waiting for the evolution to start. Sure is tempting to stop there. But can you suspect, as many of you already thought, that you'd seen traces or imagined traces of this kind of stuff throughout history, but that at any given time you could look at it, if indeed you knew what was going on at any particular time, or you could take this as being a kind of talk, but not just on the individual level of what's going on between your assignments, but such as what's going on in a 20 or 30 year period from one generation to another. You've got to be able to look way beyond this from any kind of personal view. You got to get way like this. There's a big hole over here. If you just come over here and look through it, if you can find out how to get over here, and you look through that, and you could see this kind of stuff is being talk going on with whole, I'll have to get technical, globs of people. We're not talking about the individual now. that talk is what humans, that is, each individual, does while awaiting their next assignment, look at it as being, don't let the technical talk through you, globs, whole bunches then, of people. Who knows how many? I'm not going to tell you. Just lots. Whole tribes, whole groups, whole temporal groups even. That it's while this one generation, in quotation marks obviously, but while one generation is awaiting their next assignment. Of course, their next assignment, in case you don't know, is the upcoming generation. They're never going to get the next assignment. They're going to be gone somewhere else, known as Fat City. Well, it's known as Dead City. But that is the next assignment. But on a large scale, the kind of talk that this stuff is, if you could see it in a certain way, is a larger scale talk while one group, one tribe, one era is between assignments. That is, waiting for the next era, generation, group. Right, now we'll start tonight. Maybe. All right. A citizen and the state, also known as the individual and life. How's that for a heading? A good citizen is questioned by someone, like a reporter, someone. And they ask, theoretically, what he'd be willing to do to help the state. Remember, those of you, especially on tape, that I am not talking about politics. I'm having to use verbal examples, but this is not about politics. That's why I gave you that opening. You could look at the title as being, of this paragraph, a citizen and the state, semicolon, or AKA, the individual and life, because that's what you're dealing with. The state is life. If you can see life through a hole like that, then you get down like this, is when you begin to think you're seeing things such as the state or a religion or a nationality, and etc. But the citizen, the individual, the citizen in the state, the individual in life. But the citizen in the state is asked, sort of theoretically, would he be willing to do that which is best for the state? This arises all the time, throughout history, all the time, whether you think you've been asked directly or not. But now let's picture we have this one good citizen, appears to be on the surface, just a good old middle class, right in the middle of the bell curve, part of life's everyday necessary energy transformers, and this good citizen refuses politely, civilly, to respond to this question, as he puts it, until he knows whether what's going to be asked of him that may be best for the state is indeed also best for him. If we were talking about politics, if we were talking about everyday affairs and that was the end of it, then I would have to point out to you that this sort of scenario does not occur naturally. If it did occur, it would be a kind of mutation. You would have either somebody who is going to rebound against such an inquiry. They're going to say no, that they will not do what's best for the state, and they are not in the majority at any particular time and place. The middle of the bell curve, the middle class of life's human transfer systems, is going to respond, generally speaking, in a positive manner when asked, will you join in and do what's best for the state, for the group, for the whole? Now, people cannot analyze it, but if they did analyze what I'm suggesting to you, the best they could come up with, if they were getting close to something a little more complex, would be that life is simply arranged in such a way, or that decent, civilized governments, power structures, are arranged in such a way that the citizen, the individual, is not asked to do that which is going to be, in some wide, extreme manner, harmful to him. When that happens, you're talking about a very tyrannical, a very dictatorial, an insane power structure somewhere that is doomed. That revolution is always on the way. That you just cannot survive that kind of structure. It is alien to life. Forget politically. It's just alien to life. Some educated, intellectually ordinary people might conclude. Look at it another way, not just politically. All religions, but along with all political systems, that is, all states. Then even all cultural mores, if you want to run it off laterally outside of religion and what would appear to be overt political situations, are based and driven by a kind of petrified myth that their power originally seemed to derive from something that was alive, inspiring, transcendental, etc. So it is now down to the level that ordinary human nervous systems, under most conditions, simply are wired up and primed to accept the fact that that which is best for everybody. Now, at least the in group, you understand. If you were a good Catholic, if this is getting too weird, it's not that as vague as it may be sounding even while I listen. If you were a good Catholic, and through ordinary official channels, at your local parish, the word comes out from Rome or from your local diocese that here is what we're going to do in some area, or here's a slight change in what our rituals or beliefs or whatever, and everybody's going to have to make a little sacrifice here because it's something new or it's going to cost you some effort or some money or whatever. Assuming that you are wired up and primed to be playing out your part as a good Catholic, or as a good Albanian, as a good Russian, as a good American. There is no analyzation. It is a wired in, I'm just going to use ordinary words, assumption. But it has to do with a kind of preordained energy flow. But there is the kind of assumption that what's good for the church, what's good for the at least the in group, from whence this directive is coming, from whence the request that I do such and such, I'll make a certain sacrifice. The assumption, without any great analyzation, without any particular question, the assumption is that it's not going to hurt me if it's good for the group, if it's good for the overall state. This is the way things are arranged. To do this kind of stuff, it could be otherwise. As long as life is operating in a healthy manner in some area that could be identified as either politically oriented, religiously based, culturally directed, whatever it is, if life is healthy, then that which is going on is the individuals are asked to perform certain duties, to sacrifice, to give that which is supporting and sustaining the overall effort is not going to hurt the individual. To do this, that's not true. Because look, consider the demands that life has for ordinary people. I'm talking about ordinary, reasonable, sane, middle-class people, good Catholics, good Russians, good Americans, good Jews, decent, civilized, humane people. What does life ask of the individuals? It's not just give X amount of percentage of your income to the church, or it's not just a state saying we'll pay taxes and salute the flag and honor the king or the prime minister when he comes by. Look at what life as the state is generally asking people to do, beyond what may appear to be the obvious, like tithing, taxing, sending off your children to fight wars. That's nothing. The state, religion, the group, the tribe, the race, the nation, life. but even on what appears to be the individual levels, are demanding, or if you like, requesting, for those of you of genteel sentiments, as soon as you got down, request, then jump right to demand. Require. Life is being served by having individuals engage in anger, suffering, greed, desire for revenge, all of the everyday, normal, civilized hobbies. And of course, the ever popular believing in gods that are simpler than you are. Believing in heroes that are older and dumber, less intelligent than you are, even if you're just ordinary. If you're alive, then your gods are dead. If you're alive, you are more complex than the genes that are still speaking about gods in you, no matter how old you are, no matter where you are. So this is the kind of thing that my fictitious questionnaire started out with John Q. Good Citizen when they asked the theoretical question of, will you do that? Will you do a certain thing that will be good for the state? Will you do those things that will serve the interest of everyone? And ordinary people are wired and primed to yes. And even if they tried to analyze it a little bit, it would be, well, it's got to be the right thing. Why else? Why else would people send in voluntarily, until others required, but send in large portions of their money to the government? Why would someone, when they get a little notice that says, we decided to fight our neighbors across the river and we need some people to be killed, would you please send your son? And you go, oh, and you say, okay, you're going to have to go. Why would people do that? It's just the way things are. Why would you be angry? Why would you be envious? Why would you be all those good and naughty, neat things that people are that keep getting backhanded swipes of saying, maybe you shouldn't do that? You have religions here and there. You have passing philosophical systems that say, you'd be better off not doing that. But notice the state, put it on quotation marks and hyphenated, life as the state. And I'm giving you the full spectrum from the overall life down to any apparent particular case that you want, all the way from a religion to a state to a government. But look at it as life as the state. It demands the very things that within its own body it periodically, on a smaller level, badmouths and says you shouldn't be greedy. And yet you're hired, you're drafted almost every day, you're taxed to be greedy. You're taxed to be angry. You're taxed to be prejudicial. That's part of life. That is part of the needs of the state. And again, no one, even at an ordinary level, would have any business trying to analyze this, because it would not fly. Because they already have the first story that these very things that I'm describing aren't really necessary, that that's part of the process of civilization, of evolution, is for us to get over all these naughty things. Then if that be so, why does the state continue to send you out? Life as a state is every day, if it's not drafting you or your children into actual combat, it's drafting you 3 or 4 times a day. You just don't notice it. You get a knock at the door and it's Western Union. Instead of saying, greetings from your Uncle Sam, meet me up at Fort Jackson or Paris Island, it says, so-and-so just spoke ill of you again, and this is about the 3rd time this week. What do you plan to do about it? Are you going to serve the state or not? And you look at it and you think, well, that dirty son of a bitch. Let's see. Wait a minute. I owe him some money. Ha ha! I wonder if he'll ever get it now. And it's like, then the telegram says, thank you, Mr. Citizen. You did your share there for the moment. Just because it serves the purposes of life, I made this too vague and semi-humorous, if not obscure. The things that people are doing, whatever is going on in life at any particular time, at any particular place, over a large area, over a large spectrum of human behavior. If it's greed, if it's hostility, overt hostility, warfare, going on between two groups, the people are being asked to do that. Asked to do that. They have been drafted to do that. They are serving the purposes of the overall health of some part of life. Even if they're killing themselves, even if they are walking into open warfare and operating as a kind of cannon fodder. There is no way that an ordinary person can separate themselves from that. But to do this, you've got to be able to do otherwise. And it does not have to do with evading taxes or escaping being drafted, which I'm not commenting here or there, but that's not what I'm talking about. You have got to be able to escape doing that which would be good for the state, good for the community, that everybody else is supposed to be doing. Engaging in all the naughty stuff. Being envious, being greedy, being angry, being self-pity, and believing in God simpler than you are. That is not necessarily beneficial to someone attempting to do something. But you have almost no choice. You can talk about it. It may sound to be either of no great consequence, or it may sound as though it's simple, or you may believe that you didn't even hear what I've been talking about, but it is not so simple. It is not so obvious. And it is not so open to any real continuing question over a long period of time of can you do it or not. I don't have to ask that. If you were interested in this, is you ask yourself whether you can do it or not. When the doorbell rings, do you always answer it? Most people would say, well, yeah, but that doesn't mean I always go along with it. If you answer the door, you go along with it. Even if you answer the door and you don't like the telegram, you answered the door, that's all they wanted. The way life's arranged, there has to be a certain percentage of people that want to punch the messenger in the nose, or to read the telegram saying, would you please either send your son out to be killed or else just you get mad, or something like that. And just because you can crumple it up and throw it back in their face and say, not on your life, that's right, there has to be a certain percentage of people do that. You still answer the door. You got to know how not to answer the door. Well, plus you got to understand that it is reasonable, that there's nothing wrong with it. How many people cannot answer the door? Almost nobody. How many people have a phone and cannot answer the phone? I'm not talking about just because you're sick or you're hungover or you broke your leg and can't reach the phone. How many people that have a phone can the phone ring and you not answer it? And of course, you should know when I ask something like this, I mean really not answer it. I don't mean not answer it and then sit there on the basis that you're afraid of somebody calling up that you owe money to, or that the rest of the day you think, I wonder if that was somebody that, it was like one of these phone calls that say, congratulations, you won a free trip to Panama City, or somewhere equally as exciting. I mean not answer it and not answer it. It's almost impossible. Ordinary people, it is impossible. If you got a door and you live there, you got an address, and somebody knocks on the door, I don't mean that you're hiding from a bill collector. Somebody knocks on the door and you just don't answer. I mean, that's it. You don't answer. You don't think about it. You got no intention of answering. You're not going to regret you didn't answer. It wouldn't matter if later they say, well, that was terrible news. Somebody you know died and you didn't find out about it until 2 days later. You got to be able to do it and do it. As long as I'm talking about politics and all of you are so enthralled with it, there's another little piece. Somewhere along the line it was said by some scoundrel, I'm sure, that about the closest thing an ordinary man or that humanity can ever get to getting something for nothing is to be able to get a position with the state, a government job. Now, not just on the simple basis, I would suggest, not just on the simple basis that bureaucrats are overpaid. A government position, normally what I was inferring from that quote, my little scene, was that you get into a position with the government and you've got some ability, you've got some access to swindle, that you can steal. It's known as being at the great public trough. And if you're going to work for the state at all, if you're going to try again with the king, you got to be somewhat porcelain, piggish in your inclinations to want to be there. That's why do you want to get near the public trough? It's so you can get in there and slurp around with everybody else that's there. But right at the heart of this, and it has to do with energy, but I'm going to, as always, have to explain it in words to start with to get you to look. It would appear to be that this is close to something for nothing, in that if you get on the government payroll, if you get down to the king's chamber somewhere and you get yourself some kind of little penny ante job and you can steal, it's going to be at such, the arrangement is such that, let us say that you're only stealing every year. You got your access to some kind of books or tax collection or something, some user's fee, that you're only snitching $1 from each of the citizens of the state. And so that each person won't even notice it, much less be harmed by it, except you being in that position to get $1 from everybody. You know, you could be rolling in clover every year, just on the side. I suggest that that is the basis that has always been behind such ideas, that a government position, being on the king's payroll, is about the closest a human can ever come to getting something for nothing. Because it's not just to be in favor of the king, it's not just to be on the public payroll, it's to have access to steal. But to steal, if you know what you're doing, if you had any business getting a job, to steal in such a way that you're only taking a little bit from all the other citizens. And it's so small that each individual citizen will never miss it, never notice it, and will not be harmed. You're not stealing some poor widow's check every month. Once or twice a year, you're stealing $1 from her check. So instead of her getting $500 a month in her pension, she gets $4.99 one month. She don't know. You just do that with everybody. Would you consider this internally? Consider this in your intellectual, individual sense of your own self, the nervous system, the brain operating as a state. And then ask, which no one has ever done, but here is the situation, ask, are you truly benefiting from all of your other parts being taxed and swindled just to serve life's overall needs, which I'm suggesting is exactly what's happening as long as you think the way that you ordinarily think, as long as you think the way that does not require any additional effort, that you are, as it were, in a position of working for the state. That is, you having what seems to be your own sense of I. That is the level at which your own brain is now operating. The highest level. And yours is not that much different than anybody else if you're ordinary. But there it is, and it is like having a position with the government. But to keep that thing going, I am trying to get you to see, allegorically at least to start with, to keep this thing going, to make the position worthwhile of you being you. You've got to cheat and swindle, or you wouldn't put up with it, I suggest, metaphorically speaking. And to do it does not destroy the rest of you if you're ordinary, does it? No. If it does, you're in a small minority, you're a mutant. You're put away, you're treated, you're drugged. But ordinary people are swindling, overtaxing, overcharging with all the fees, but it's a form of swindling all of your other parts, separate from what you think of as being I. But now I ask you, is that getting something for nothing? With ordinary people, they could not even conceive of this, and it would be useless to try to describe it, and there would be no answer yes or no. But I ask you, if you are indeed swindling all your other parts, but so little that you never notice it. Remember, it's just maybe $1 a year. If you got enough parts, 50 cents a year. Jesus, who'd bend over and pick up 50 cents? And yet, the position with the government that a person may have, assuming they got enough in the population, you get 50 cents from each person, you got to know. You can come out smelling good. And apparently at no great expense to anyone else. Back to my question. Are you sure that you are benefiting by swindling, by overcharging, by taxing, even if it seems to be by reasonable means, if you can't start seeing it as a form of swindling, but of actually taxing all of your other parts just to support this, just so that you can apparently get something for nothing, just so that you can stay at the public trough. The public trough is being fed the energy necessary to think just enough to stay alive. No more. Is that a deal? Have you really pulled one over on somebody? Life? Everyone else? Everyone dumber than you? Everyone who's ever mistreated you? Everyone who does not pay attention to you? But no matter who you're apparently doing it for, my suggestion is that you end up swindling the additional parts, the other parts of you that cannot talk, the parts that do not seem to be part of your clique, that you are now in a position with the government, and you've got a kind of cronyism, you've got your own good old boy network right in here, maybe like one or two other people in here, voices, that apparently you have something in common with that you can sort of trust. Now, how else can you be sarcastic? And you got to be able to laugh, you got to be able to say, did you hear what I just called that guy when he wasn't looking? Or you just said it to yourself, that you smiled at somebody and said, thank you so much, you've been a great help and it's been a delight to meet you, and to yourself, you think, you ignorant bastard. Plus you realize I just stole $20 from you and you don't know it. You were too dumb to know it. All right, there's at least one other crony in you for you to be able to say that. There's no enjoyment. There's got to be somebody to hear it. That is the swindle. That is the appearance almost of getting something for nothing. I can be greedy. I can laugh at people. I can be sarcastic. I can look at people and lie to people. I can mislead people. And it's a form of swindle that I'm doing this. No, it doesn't hurt anybody. Because you push it too far, you run the risk in ordinary affairs of somebody whipping your ass. And so you don't push it too far. It's like, I'll just laugh at them a little bit. I'll just put them on just a little bit. I'll just be just sarcastic enough that maybe the person will go, and then I'll look innocent and they'll think, he didn't mean that way. So it is a form of swindle that you're only taking such a small amount from everybody, from all the little citizens, that no one really notices it and no one's really harmed by it. Maybe not. Under ordinary conditions, there is no question of maybe not. But there may be a question that you are coasting along trying to do this and getting something for nothing. But what you're doing is swindling all the other parts. You're not hurting yourself unless you're attempting to do something unusual. Under any ordinary conditions, no harm is being done. And you can't even call it a swindle. Nothing's amiss. I'm talking about kings again and politics. Inasmuch as the king of state, whatever would be the ruling power in some state, out there and here, that the king of the state would laugh off, shrug off, bourgeois criticism, catcalls, as he strolls out in the garden, as he strolls down the street. And the crowd's there, and you hear somebody go, or yoo-hoo. What does a king care? From the hoi polloi, a few ill remarks, rude noises. What does a king care? Consider the position of whatever a real revolutionist would be. How could someone attempting to do this give any heed to what their own nervous system might say about them? What kind of regard, if we were talking about ordinary affairs, would you have for a king in every sense of the world, any ruling power, that which seems to be in charge, if it is subject, absolutely, to the smallest degree of criticism, that the king comes out and the man is a striking figure, all the way from his motor skills to his limbic and artistic abilities, his demeanor, his haircut, his charisma, and all the fanfare. And suddenly from the crowd somebody goes, and the man's crushed. He just goes to pieces. What kind of regard? Your nervous system continues to talk, and to say it makes cat calls, rude noises, untoward remarks toward you is just to state the obvious. And what do? You continually stop. But of course, the first story from life is, well, wait a minute, only a fool would not heed reasonable constructive criticism. Who is in a position to criticize a king? I mean, if indeed he's a king now. A pretender? What do we have here? The man comes out. He has all of the paraphernalia. He has the dress. At first blush, he has the demeanor, the tone of voice, if not the tone of movement. You know what we're talking about. We're talking about I. You're talking about you. That there it is. Yes, I know what I'm doing. Until suddenly somebody says, no, you don't. You go, I don't? Well, I thought... Well, let me tell you my opinion on this. I believe such and such. And somebody goes, ha! And as they would say in the movies, I guess, you look for a hole in which to crawl, or you wish the floor would open up. What kind of authority is that? What kind of king, what kind of intellectual wherewithal are you talking about? Now let's go from apparently the externally based criticisms. What's the ones that drive most people into the area of wondering, if I were to follow this or that, would it cut down on stress? Rather than the guy in the car route that said, is this to alleviate stress or to cause more stress? Which I know no one wants to pursue that much. That's why I let it end up in a kind of inconclusive joke. But look at the basis. Where do most civilized people, that is, people whose nervous system talks a lot to them? In case you never figured that out, that's one of the proofs, if you need it, or if there was a standard to tell whether somebody's civilized, as opposed to they're wearing fig leaves or they're wearing a Bill Blass suit. You don't really need that. I mean, pretty obvious, I guess. You could go with that. But if you wanted to get more technical, if you had a machine to judge how much their nervous system talks to them, that is, how much they seem to talk to themselves, that's the degree of civilization. That's when you're civilized, the more you talk to yourself. So, the more you're civilized, you're not dealing. It's all a matter of degree, of course, but the more civilized you are, the more intellectually driven you are at the ordinary level, which is the same thing, the more the criticism, the more the cat calls, they're coming from in here. I mean, nowadays, how often are you worried about, at work they may say, we wish you would work faster, or you did not meet the sales quota, or this or that. But where is the real self-inflicted wounds and criticism? where do wounds come from nowadays in the criticism? It's self. It is you walking through the crowd and your own nervous system goes, yoo-hoo, hey, kingy. Your fly's unzipped. Your brain's unzipped. Why would a real revolutionist give any heed to what his lower class, the lowest parts of his nervous system would say about him? Why? We're running out of tape for me to pursue it, but it's a lot more, of course, than a question, and it's more than a rhetorical question. Some of you should see it. To what end? At the general level, it is to an end. This is part of the demands of ordinary people to serve life. That is part of the draft notice. It's for you to heed that. But why, if there was anything in your arsenal of thinking that was extraordinary, then why would that part pay heed to the cruder, less civilized, less intellectual parts? Because that's the source of the criticism. It is indeed the hoi polloi. It is the unwashed masses in you. If you get real good, this applies even to the guides, because it does not have to just appear to be your own nervous system talking to you, because I know that some of you still have periodic trouble dealing with that kind of description. How about what people call their conscience? They believe that in some way the guides have instilled in us, naughty person, naughty, naughty. Every time you do that, every time you think that, shame, 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 shame. And people, many people still think, well, that's not me talking. That's certainly not anybody else. I don't need a priest or rabbi to tell me I shouldn't do this. I know I shouldn't. I know I shouldn't. They may not want to call it this, but it's the guide speaking. It's their own genetic background. But it is still simpler than they are. They are heeding the voice. They're heeding the noise of parts of their own nervous system that is dumber, poorer, less intelligent than they are. If you're not a real revolutionist, then I could end on a, don't take it as real sarcasm, but I could say, if you do go along with that, then as always, welcome home. Welcome home. Every night when you get home and you open the door and you go inside and you close it, even if you don't like it, at least you know I'm home. I am where everybody badmouths me. And you may live alone, but at least I know where I am. I am king. I am king of my own dump. And I know I'm king because most of the people here laugh at me. They criticize me, so I know I'm in charge. Good night.